How far would a true artist go for perfection? In this episode of Hearthside Horrors, we unearth the secret of the Two Plaster Casts, an incredibly dark and gruesome tale from the Victorian archives. When a sculptor and a surgeon disagree on the anatomical accuracy of a crucifix, their obsession drives them to commit an unspeakable act in the name of art. Dim the lights and brace yourself. This is not your typical ghost story. The secret of the Two Plaster Casts. Years before Queen Victoria took the throne, two English gentlemen sat at a table on a summer evening. This was not so long ago that middle-aged people today cannot remember. They were sipping wine after dinner and talking quietly. Both men were famous. One was a sculptor whose statues decorated palaces and whose busts were the pride of the nobility. The other man was a renowned surgeon and expert in anatomy. The surgeon looked about 50 years old, but he was actually at least 10 years older. The sculptor was probably no more than 35. A stone bust of the surgeon stood on a pedestal opposite the table. It was so well made that it looked like real flesh and bone. This statue showed the bond of friendship between the two men. The surgeon was showing his friend a rare item from his collection. It was a crucifix carved from ivory and set in pure gold. "The carving is exquisite," said Mr. Fiddies, the sculptor. "The muscles and the flesh are modeled wonderfully for such a small size. However, the more I think about it, the more I believe the artistic idea is wrong. You likely know more about this than I do." "You are speaking in riddles," Dr. Carnell replied. "Please go on and explain." "It is an idea I first had as a student," Fiddies said. "Tradition and respect prevent most people from questioning it. But if you think about it, you will see it is impossible. A person nailed to a cross by their hands and feet could not hold the position we always see in art. Those who paint it that way fail to show the true agony. Imagine the actual position of a man, living or dead, under such terrible torture." "You startle me," the surgeon said. "Your remarks are true and very obvious. It is strange that people have overlooked this for so long. The more I think about it, the more the idea of crucifixion horrifies me. I am used to seeing suffering, but this is different. How would you represent such agony?" "I cannot tell," the sculptor replied. "It is useless to guess. The strain on the muscles and the swelling of the limbs would be too much to imagine. This seems important to art and even to religion," the surgeon said. "Perhaps," the sculptor answered, "but a true representation might be too horrible for anyone to look at." Still, the surgeon continued, "I would like to see the real effect. I want to see it for the sake of scientific observation. I would also like to see it if it were possible," said Fiddies. "But we would have to do it without causing pain, which seems impossible." "Maybe not," the surgeon mused. "I have a plan. It would be strange if the two of us could not carry it out together." The two men began to speak in low, serious voices. They mentioned the king several times. It was clear they both had enough influence to ask for royal help. They would need this help to make their plan work. Evening turned into night as they spoke. While they were talking, another event was happening nearby. Between Pimlico and Chelsea, there was a wooden footbridge over a canal. At that time, it was a simple timber path. Later, people called it Cutthroat Bridge because of what happened that night. While the sculptor and surgeon drank their wine, a man named Peter Stark was murdering his wife at that bridge. In those days, criminals were executed quickly after they were found guilty. Peter Stark was a retired soldier and a mean-spirited man. He was found guilty on a Friday and sentenced to die on the following Monday. He showed no regret for his crimes. He was a tall, strong man of middle age. The official record said that Peter Stark was hanged at Newgate Prison with 4 other men. The records claimed he was cut down after a few minutes when a pardon arrived, but he was already dead. However, the true story is different. A room inside the prison had been set aside for Dr. Carnell and Mr. Fiddies, while Peter Stark was hanging on the gallows. The sculptor was in that room preparing plaster and water. He also had a large wooden cross made of rough oak. Soon, the executioner entered the room. He carried the body of Peter Stark on his shoulders and threw it on a table. "Are you sure he is dead?" Mr. Fiddies asked. "He is dead as a herring," the executioner replied. "But he is still as warm and limp as if he had only fainted." "Then go to work at once," the sculptor said. The man stripped the body and nailed it to the wooden cross. They propped the cross against the wall. The executioner looked at the body with pride. He asked if he should tie the man's waist, but the sculptor said no. He told the man to rub the body with oil so the plaster would not stick. Then the executioner left. Mr. Fiddies was used to working with dead bodies. He began mixing a large batch of plaster. Suddenly, he heard a dripping sound. He thought the water was leaking, but there was no leak in the buckets. Then he looked at the body and jumped back in fear. The murderer was bleeding. The sculptor turned pale. The head of Peter Stark moved. It lifted up for a moment, the eyes rolled, and the man let out a groan of intense pain. Mr. Fiddies fainted as Dr. Carnell entered the room. The doctor saw what happened immediately. "Peter!" cried out again. The surgeon acted fast and locked the door. He took a tiny, sharp instrument from his pocket. He quickly touched the back of the man's neck with it. It was a tiny wound, but it cut the spinal cord. Peter Stark was now truly dead. When the sculptor woke up, he looked at the body in fear. He realized the man had been alive. "Do not be afraid," Dr. Carnell said. "I promise he is dead now. What you saw was just a muscular reaction." The sculptor went back to work. He covered the body in plaster to make a mold. After that, Dr. Carnell removed the skin from the body so they could make a second mold of the muscles. The 2 plaster casts were finished, but they were ghastly. They were too horizontal and horrific for any artist to use. Fiddies refused to keep them. Dr. Carnell took them home and hid them in his attic. He told his family never to go into that room. However, his youngest daughter was curious. One day while her father was away, she entered the room. No one knows exactly what she thought when she saw the figure on the cross. The shock was so great that she lost her mind and never recovered. Years later, those plaster figures were moved to a famous studio. That is where the secret of their origin was finally told. The sculptor and the surgeon are both dead now, so the secret can be shared. It is my task to tend these stories carefully and to read them as faithfully as I am able. When listeners speak kindly of a telling, the work is permitted to continue. Good night. Thanks for listening to Hearthside Horrors. Please note that the narration in today's episode was produced using high-fidelity synthetic narration. Sleep well.